What's up, BookTube? Today, I'm going to talk to you in this video about a subject that's maybe a little bit more serious than what I would typically talk about on these types of videos, where I usually try to have a little bit more fun. It may or may not reflect in my personality, but that is nonetheless the goal. But in this particular video, I'm going to be a little bit more serious because it is an interesting topic that I think is often swept under the rug, especially with people of color, and that's the issue of anxiety. And I bring this up because I ran across a book that kept popping up in my suggestions, if you will, on Amazon. And as I kept seeing this book, I thought, I need to really think about giving this book a try. And I thought about getting it on my Kindle, but then I thought, no, I think I actually, in this case, want a physical copy. Not that you can't highlight passages on your Kindle, you can. But I wanted to be able to physically highlight copies and to be able to put little tabs into the book. But something interesting happened as I was doing this with this particular book. I got on such a roll that I ended up having to go back and actually put in the tabs and do some of the highlights. And the book I'm talking about is Shook One by Charlamagne Tha God. And many people might recognize Charlamagne Tha God from The Breakfast Club, very popular radio show that certainly has gained a lot of acclaim over the years. And his previous book is called Black Privilege, which was a New York Times bestseller. This one is also a national bestseller, and I think for good reason. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit from the back cover just to give you an idea of what this book is about, even though I kind of described it a little bit. Okay, so fear is holding you back. It's time to turn the tables and channel your fears to fuel your success. With raw honesty, Charlamagne presents his own struggles with anxiety, including fear of failure, fear of God, parental paranoia, and fear of being black in America. Ironically, even after achieving national prominence as a radio personality, Charlamagne still found himself paralyzed by anxiety and distrust. Now, in Shook One, he is working through these problems, many of which he traces back to cultural PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with help from mentors, friends, and therapy. Shook One is also a call to action. Therapy and showing weakness are not always easy subjects, but it's your right to get help if you need it. Now, that last sentence, I want to go back to that again. Therapy and showing weakness are not always easy subjects, but it's your right to get help if you need it. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways that I had from this particular book, is that too many times we're asked to be tough, to have a tough exterior, and to not be weak, to not show signs of weakness, when in fact we need to address issues as they come up rather than ignore them and pretend as if they're not actually issues that are impacting us on a daily basis. So with that, I want to read a few excerpts from this book because there's some points that I marked, not a ton, but there's some items that I marked that I want to share with you as I work my way through this particular video. The first excerpt that I want to read has to do with social media. Actually, the first couple of excerpts I'm going to read have to do with social media. So I want you to keep that in mind because I do a lot of work with social media. And if you're a human being, in many cases, you're going to have a lot of engagement to a greater or lesser degree, of course, with social media. So keep that in mind as I read these couple of passages. Okay, this first one is from Psychology Today. And a new study from the University of Oxford reaffirms the importance of cultivating and nurturing friendships with face-to-face contact. Now, that's going to be important when you think of the second half of this particular statement. The researchers found that using social media exclusively to interact with close friends may inadvertently cause the bonds of those friendships to weaken. And so a lot of times we do rely on our engagement with social media as a way to interact with people, but is it a real authentic interaction, or is it something very different than what would happen if we encountered each other in real life? Now, here comes the next excerpt, and this one is kind of an interesting one because, again, it goes back to social media and some of the things that we inadvertently draw from what we see in social media that can really distort our worldview. Okay. Although social media may seem like the perfect way to make and maintain friendships, This research shows that face-to-face interaction is essential for truly authentic relationships, and that shares, selfies, and likes are no replacement for the bonding that takes place while sharing food, experiences, and anecdotes. So you don't want to replace what's happening in social media with what could and should be happening in real life. This next excerpt, I'm going to stay on the topic of social media. When we spend countless hours each week scrolling through people's Instagram and Facebook accounts, our own lives can start to feel insignificant or uninspiring by comparison. This is one of the biggest problems that I think a lot of people have when they get anxiety and depression based on what they see in social media, because you see other people in social media, people that you may be envious of in one way or another. And when you see the things that you are envious of, and then you start to compare it to the things that you don't have that make you envious of what other people have, it can only help to drag many people down. Maybe not everybody, but certainly a large number of people. For this next excerpt, I'm going to talk about the impact that stress can have, particularly for African American men. And Charlamagne does a really good job of touching on this subject, and it's a very sensitive subject because, again, I talked about the macho attitude that many men are expected to have, especially black men. And that can sometimes lead to things getting bottled up, and where you think that maybe you're working through it internally, you could actually be doing more harm than good. When your stress levels are chronically high, it can create all sorts of lasting damage. Physically, it can lead to diabetes, which African American men are almost twice as likely to develop as white men. It can also dramatically increase your blood pressure, which might explain why, according to the American Heart Association, the prevalence of high blood pressure in African Americans is the highest in the world. And Charlamagne goes on to say, no wonder that African Americans are 1.5 times more likely to die of heart disease than whites. And again, stress, of course, can play a major role in that. And these are the kinds of things, the uncomfortable conversations that we often don't want to have. I want to continue on the theme of PTSD. And this excerpt, I think, is going to help to kind of further emphasize the importance of this discussion. Dr. William Lawson, a former professor of psychiatry at Howard University and a current dean at the University of Texas at Austin, told The Root, PTSD assumes that a person has insight and sensitivity. People assume that black people are invulnerable, that we do not have a function apparatus to experience any kind of mood complexity. And Charlamagne goes on and says, ain't that some bullshit? It goes on. This is a great example of why systemic racism is so insidious. We're subjected to traumatic experiences almost our entire lives, but when we demonstrate the symptoms of PTSD, we're told it's all in our heads, or that we're not smart enough to have an emotional reaction to the abuses we suffer. It's no wonder so many of us spend our lives getting high. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to me, but I can see where it might apply to other people, where you look for certain types of coping mechanisms that can be counterproductive to your health and your well-being. The next one, this next excerpt, getting toward the end here, this is actually the last one, it goes to the importance of self-care, so keep that in mind. I'd also highly recommend you consider changing your diet if there's even a chance you might suffer from PTSD. As I mentioned, the stress that comes from racism absolutely makes your body create hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. According to the Mayo Clinic, over time, the presence of those hormones in your system can lead to such conditions as anxiety, depression, digestive problems, headaches, heart disease, sleep problems, weight gain, memory, and concentration impairment. How many of those are you suffering from? That's pretty much a laundry list of issues a lot of black folks deal with. The good news is that you can fight off a lot of those ailments with a diet that boosts your immunity. The key is avoiding processed foods and increasing your intake of whole foods. If you're not sure what that means, the easiest way to think of it is that anything that comes pre-made, especially in a big bag or can, is processed. If you can't grow it or catch it, it's processed. So potato chips are processed, but a baked potato is a whole food. He puts in parentheses, just keep the cheese off of it. A cookie or a piece of cake for dessert is processed, but apples or blueberries are whole foods. Pasta is processed, but salmon fillet is a whole food. They're not foods, but think of soda as processed, water as a whole. And so, that importance and emphasis on diet, of course, is very important. And I think there are many of us that can do a better job with our diet to lead a healthier lifestyle, not only physically, but mentally as well. So those are some things that I wanted to share from this book. It was really good. I read it extremely fast, and I really enjoyed seeing some things that I've been thinking about for so long played out in this book by Charlamagne. So if you're interested in how some people cope with issues related to anxiety or anxiety itself, then I would definitely recommend that you consider giving this one a try. Shook One by Charlamagne Tha God.